Howdy folks, this is Mom Pop Based. I'm Paul.
I'm Mom.
Welcome to our channel, Common Sense Conservatives from Millenials and Gen X.
If you happen to see any little fur balls running around or I end up with a kitten in my lap, it's because we have 4 cats in this house, one of which happens to be a kitten. We will introduce said cat if it decides to jump in my lap.
But you know cats can't force me to do anything.
So today we wanted to talk to you about systems of government. We are planning to leave out capitalism because it is not a system of government. It is a market system. We are, however, going to cover socialism and communism because while they are market systems, they are also forms of government.
We're also going to leave out anarchy because anarchy is just a system with no government whatsoever. People do whatever they like. Can't really work with that in a large community like the United States. You can get away with that in a small community, but nothing much bigger than a city.
Not even the city.
Not even a city. We live in a small one, so. Anyway, so before we get into that, if you find this information to be helpful, informative, amusing, or
you just want to troll us, which, by the way, those of you who decide to troll us, once a month we're going to read your comments, post them on the screen, and we're going to tear you apart. Have fun with that.
Hit that like and subscribe button, make sure you turn the notifications on so you're notified when the time to drop the video.
Well, okay, Paul, what are we going to start with?
Well, let's start back in the deep dark ages of history, right around 500 BC. We're going to go with democracy to start with.
Now, isn't that the system that the Greeks started?
Greeks started it, and it's also attributed to the Romans, maybe a little bit earlier. That's up for debate.
Well, I do remember in history class them talking about how democracy ran in the Athenian city-states, where all of the men that were eligible, that were citizens in good standing, and yes, it was only men that were citizens in good standing, were allowed to go to the forum, and they would get to listen to debates about a law that they wanted to pass or a politician that they wanted to elect. And at the end, they would literally count hands. Now, that is not something we can do in the modern world.
That's correct.
There are way too many of us.
Not to mention, even just in the United States, we're spread out across so many miles.
And when you get into the write-in candidates, I mean, Trump got made a city council member of a town where?
In Oregon. Some sort of city position.
Because they wrote him in. So, you know, if you've got everybody voting and everybody's vote counts, which, yeah, that's great, except when you get people who do things like write in Kinky Friedman. Now, those of you from Texas know who that is.
Regardless, the problem with democracy is it turns into mock rule. Basically, whoever's got the loudest voice wins the election. Let's take a small town in Texas that's mostly white with a minority Hispanic population.
Yeah, you know what you're talking about.
If you're going with the true democratic system, then those Hispanics aren't going to be represented by anybody in that city.
But take San Antonio, and you've got various districts in San Antonio. Well, those of you who know San Antonio know that the south side of San Antonio is primarily Hispanic and black. So any white people that live there, they're not going to be represented.
That's right. Makes things very, very difficult.
Well, that's because politicians nowadays have decided to base everything on the color of our skin. Race is one of the most divisive words ever created, children. It didn't need to exist. We're all the same race, we just have different colored skin.
That's a topic for another video, unfortunately.
Yes, it is. Sorry, I digress.
So we're talking about true democracy right now. Now, in a true democracy, everybody gets a vote.
And every vote counts.
Every vote counts. So if you, let's take a elementary school classroom, for example.
Could you say Canada?
And we'll get to
It is a real world situation.
You got 30 kids stuck in a room. Now, if you go in and you take the popular vote and say, hey, who wants to do recess today, or who wants to actually do schoolwork?
They're going to say recess.
Majority
Except for the weird kid in the back.
Majority of the students, I'm willing to bet, are going to say they want to do recess. Do that vote day after day, probably get the same results. Which is great for those kids that just want to do recess, but the ones that actually want to learn something, well, they're kind of stuck doing recess with everybody else. But that brings us into the next section, representative democracy. And you'll be hearing this again later on, so pay attention. Now, representative democracy is where the people represent, people elect people to represent themselves in the government.
Now, you think that's what we've got here in America, right?
Pretty close.
It's close, but that's what Canada has. Canada is a representative democracy, and because it is, 3 cities pick who runs that country. Nobody that lives in the middle of the country gets their vote counted.
See, in Canada, much like down here in the U.S., liberals populate the cities. Most of the conservatives live out in the country. Well, because of the population of the cities, their votes determine who sits in the government. Conservative people, they don't get much say of anything.
As we noticed when the trucker strike happened.
Mm-hmm.
Look what Trudeau did to them. He literally seized their bank accounts because they were protesting. Those of you who have protested with BLM, how would you feel if Trump had done that to you? He didn't though, did he? But I guarantee it'd be something that Biden would do if somebody were to riot against him.
Yeah, just look at January 6 people. But we're getting a bit off topic.
Not really, but
I'm talking about systems of government, not the oppression of the government.
fair enough. That's a topic for another day, I suppose.
So moving on from democracy, which is kind of the root of a lot of government systems these days. But you also got a lot of other systems, and a lot of these are, I wouldn't say interchangeable, but they come in combinations. So to start with, we've got monarchy. Now, monarchy is going back to far beyond the history of the Greeks and Romans. You can look back in history and find emperors, empresses, kings, queens, princesses, chieftains, sultans, so on and so forth.
Emperors, empresses, czars.
Now, monarchy is ruled usually by a single person, usually passed down through a family. Take England, for example, before they became parliamentary, constitutional parliament.
I believe they're a constitutional monarchy.
So before the parliament was established, king or the queen, typically the king, had final rule on just about everything.
And we saw what happened with that in the case of Henry VIII. He overturned an entire country just to divorce his wife and marry another woman, and then divorce and kill her, and marry another woman, and another woman, and another woman. The entirety of the government of England got overturned by a man's libido.
Mm-hmm.
This is what happens when you put one person or one family in charge.
Typically, the power of monarchy gets passed down to the family. So father to son, mother to daughter, so on. Which, of course, is where we get the importance of crown princes, princesses, people trying to marry into separaries. It gets overly complicated after a while. Monarchies are famous for turning into something else, another form of government called autocracy. Now, an autocracy is where power rests in a single person.
Putin.
No, Putin's actually got people that he answers to. Not many.
Really?
You want to look at autocratic government, take Nazi Germany, Hitler, Pol Pot, Mao Zedong.
Okay, and on the Hitler topic, I'm going to have to say, no, Hitler wasn't an autocrat. Way too many of the people in his hierarchy actually knew what was going on, and he didn't. So, And mind you, I don't like Hitler. Hitler was a jerk. He's burning where he belongs.
But you also have people like Stalin and Lenin. Now, typically with autocrats, they only care about one thing: what's good for them. If it's good for the country as well, yeah, so it's much the better. But they're in it for the money, the power, women, etc.
To do whatever they want.
Takes us to another one called the plutocracy. Now, a lot of people have probably heard it before, but never really looked into it.
I've never actually heard of plutocracy.
No.
And it's ruled by the wealthy. And we can see that in places like France during the Renaissance, Italy, even sometimes England. Now we have Hadassah.
Okay.
This is our newest one.
Say hi. This is our baby Hadassah, named for Queen Esther in the Bible. For those of you who don't know, Hadassah was her Jewish name. Esther was her Babylonian name.
Anyways, plutocracy is the rich ruling over everybody else. You can see this in a lot of the noble families throughout Europe, various other places as
A
well.
lot of people would say that we have something like that here in this country with the 1%. We don't. You would like to say that. I know you'd like to say that. Even I would like to say that. But the reality is, no, we are not a plutocracy.
So to move on from that, we have what's called the meritocracy, and that's where people gain power and rule through their individual abilities. Now, generally speaking, most elections here in the U.S. are merit-based. People get voted for by their stance on certain positions and people's belief in their ability to do a good job.
This, however, is not the system of government in America.
But, like I said, a lot of these get demined very easily. So you could have a meritocratic monarchy, for example. Or
Somebody gets made king because he's the right person to be king.
even a theological monarchy.
Oh, you should have the theocracies.
That's where we're going next. So theocracy is ruled by people of a certain religious practice.
Real world example. Any of the Middle Eastern countries that are Muslim,
Mm-hmm.
they're all run by a theocracy. They literally follow laws from their religious text, but in a secular way. That's called Sharia law. We actually have some of that here in the U.S. Look at Dearborn.
But in order to take part in government in a theocracy, you have to be a member of the religion in good standing. Otherwise, you can't do anything. You can't vote, you can't participate, you can't represent.
And I believe in the case of Muslims, women are not allowed to vote.
In most Muslim countries, they're not. There are a few exceptions, such as Iraq, the election in Iraq back in the early 2000s, mid-2010s, where women were actually allowed to vote. But of course, that's only because the
American soldiers were protecting them.
and the government that was in place was backed by America. Now, theocracy has its problems because, of course, it depends on a state religion in order to enforce power.
And whenever you have a state religion, there is no freedom of religion.
No freedom of religion. And I know some of you atheists out there are screaming that, well, of course we can't have a state religion. Well, that's why.
Well, hate to break it to you guys, but you atheists, you do have a state religion. It's called book or science.
So, like I said, a lot of those can be mixed and matched, put together. Democratic theocracy, autocratic theocracy, autocratic monarchy, even a democratic monarchy. It's possible.
But now we move into the system of government here in this country.
Well, yeah, we'll start with that one, then we'll move on to our They're great adversaries from across the ocean. So the United States system is basically a republic. Now, republic is very similar to representative democracy in that individuals are elected to represent the people in their districts to make laws, make sure the government's running smoothly, make sure that the people's interests are taken care
The difference is that in a republic, you have a checks and balance system to try and keep any other branch of the government from overriding another branch, so that no one of the three branches of government can really function without the others. For the government to work properly, they all actually have to be in harmony, which is why we're seeing things right now like New York ignoring the fact that SCOTUS threw out their gun laws, calling them unconstitutional.
Now, here in the U.S., we've got the executive branch, which is the president, legislative branch, which is the Senate and the House, and the judiciary branch, which is the
SCOTUS.
court. Now, each of those three branches, each has their own areas of power, and they have the ability to check the power of the other two branches to make sure that nobody's getting too much power or pushing things around too much.
The problem is that one of the branches of government have figured out that as long as they bury it in thousands of pages of legislature, we don't actually know what they're voting on. So they have voted raises for themselves, which they were never supposed to. They have padded the amount of justices in the Supreme Court, and they stomp all over states' rights.
Not to mention the billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars going to overseas.
Oh, and you environmentalist, animal-loving people out there, you should know under Obama, they actually legalized the sale of the United States Mustang for meat. Not here, in third world countries. So you have people coming over here paying to hunt the Mustangs and then take that meat and sell it in Europe, down in South America, because everywhere but America eats horse meat. Yes, he made sure it was done over Thanksgiving weekend, and it was buried within thousands of pages of legislature. How's that for your environmentally friendly Democrats? Sorry. It needed to be brought up. For heaven's sake.
Anyways,
Now we're going to our late great enemies across the sea.
well, like I said, we're not going to discuss capitalism because capitalism is not a form of government. It does, however, play
Impact government.
in our current form of government here in the U.S. And that impact is through corporations and individual billionaires making donations to senators, presidential candidates, and the like.
You got the money, you can get whoever you want elected.
So there is a little bit of a plutocratic system in place there as well. But let's move across the oceans to what is now Russia, what was in our day the
USSR
Soviet Socialist.
Republic. And nothing about it was a republic.
No, not at all.
And it wasn't even socialist by the 80s. It was full-on communist. Now, there is a slight difference between socialism and communism, but what a lot of people don't understand, especially a lot of you that are pushing for socialism, but not communism. Socialism is communism in its infancy.
Mm-hmm.
Under socialism, the workers own the factory. But if the workers own the factory, who tells the workers what to do? Somebody has to take charge.
That's right.
And that's when it turns into communism. And once you get the government in your pocketbook, it's impossible to get them out.
Now, I know some young you saying, but that's just an economic system. Well, it starts that way. I'll grant you that. But let's take that pencil factory, for example. The workers, all in equal share, well, that's great, but who's putting the capital up to build that factory? Who had the idea that pencils would be something that people would buy to make money? It wasn't all the workers. And so the problem with socialism, first and foremost, is it doesn't create anything. Well, no, I take it back. It creates one thing.
It creates hardship.
It creates hardship for all the people under it.
Sorry about that. We had to stop briefly to keep cats from fighting.
Everyone's going to 4 cats in one house. Now, like I was saying, socialism doesn't create anything but hardship. Let's take another example. Classroom. You see, in the factory example, all the workers, they get an equal share of whatever the factory makes, which sounds great, right? But let's move into the classroom.
How about you put all your time and effort into earning an A?
But your partner over here decides that he's more interested in video games and girls.
No,
and
not just
golfers.
the partner, the entire class, because it would be the entire class under a socialist system.
Yeah, but
So you've got a couple of students who busted their tails earning A's, and they need it because maybe they've got a scholarship, or maybe their parents said, we're not going to continue to pay for your education unless you have A's.
then you got other people in the class who
Don't care. They're there, they're getting government grants and loans and nothing to basically keep them focused on their work.
So you've got those ones over there, not really putting any effort in, and they're just getting by with D's. And then maybe you got a handful of people in there that aren't too bright, but they try their best, and they're pulling C's.
And now suddenly you get a brand new professor who believes in instituting socialist grading.
So now, all of a sudden, all those people that were making A's in the class, well, they can't all make A's. So he's got to knock their grades down. And when he's knocking their grades down, he's boosting up the grades of the people who did put in the work and effort. Now, that sounds okay at first, right? But let me ask you this. If you're out there day in, day out, busting your tail, putting in the work, putting in the effort, only to find out that Joe Blow over there, who's not doing anything, is getting the exact same grade as you,
You are going to be mad. Yeah, you're not going to want to do the work. And, there are people that are going to be in that class that they're going to end up having to drop out of college because they aren't pulling high enough grades to maintain their scholarships because of other students and a professor who decided, I don't think it's fair that some students get A's and others get B's. So I'm just going to level everybody out.
Now, see, this is where socialism turns into communism. Because in the factory example, you get some people that are busting their butts doing the hard work, and you got a bunch of people who are sitting back doing nothing. They're all getting the same benefits, so by putting the work. Well, then the people who are working hard realize we're getting the same benefits as everybody else, so we don't need to put in as much effort.
Suddenly nothing's getting done.
So the government has to step in and actually do something about that. So then you get a foreman put in place by the government. Now, this foreman is not necessarily the best person for the job. More than likely, he was related to someone in the government.
I was about to say that. More than likely it's a, what do they call that? Nepotism situation. Probably somebody's cousin or idiot nephew. It's often how it worked. Ask anybody who lived in the communist USSR.
Mm-hmm. Now, the only thing he's going to care about is, well, two things. Is one, are you following the party line? And two, are you meeting your quota? Communism's all about quotas. So you get the government move in. Well, then he's got to report back to his superiors, and everything gets reported back to the central government. And guess who makes the decision on what gets produced, how much gets sold for, what the workers end up taking home and pay?
Some bureaucrat
Probably thousands of miles away from the factory.
who knows nothing about the factory,
Nothing about the factory,
nothing about the workers, nothing about the workers' families, nothing about the situations that people have.
The only thing they know is that they came into government with next to nothing in their pocket, they're leaving with millions of dollars. Sounds
Vaguely familiar. That would be any of our modern politicians here in the U.S. But why do you think they spend 40, 50 years up on the Hill? They go in with student loan debt, and they come out millionaires.
I can think of two offhand.
Go ahead. Name them. Shame the devil.
Mr. Bernie Sanders and Sleepy Joe Biden.
I can name a third.
Oh, there's
Obama.
multiple.
Obama left office with a couple extra $1 million. How much does the president get paid?
$400,000.
I mean, I suppose he could have accrued that just off of his pay, except that if you actually look at his net worth after he left the White House,
They've increased by 30 times.
yeah. As opposed to, say, Trump, who wouldn't even take a paycheck. I think he took $1 and then gave it to charity because he had to.
Yeah, I get it.
He lost millions, by the way.
We're drifting a bit off topic. We're talking
Well,
about systems of government.
We are and we aren't. We should address the corruption in the various systems of government.
There's corruption in all.
Anytime there's human beings involved, and let me be honest, I was raised by a very conservative German father and a very, very, very liberal mother, American mother. And my father having grown up in World War II Germany, I got to hear a lot about socialism. My father had a very bad opinion of socialism because of what the German people went through, what the Nazis put the Jews through, some of which were my cousins. For those of you who said it didn't happen, it did. And then I had my mother, who behind my father's back would whisper about how, socialism in the right hands, if done properly, sound familiar, can be a great thing. And it's where we're going as humanity. No, because humans are too broken, too greedy, and far too willing to sell one another out. Heck, I can think of 5 people off the top of my head that would sell their own grandmothers for whatever they wanted.
Now, there's a saying. You can be a communist in a capitalist system, but you can't be a capitalist
in a communist system.
After Stalin took over in Russia, they had things that they called kulaks, or kulaks, excuse me, kulaks. And what the kulaks were was anybody that their neighbors thought was a capitalist. Your neighbor's got 3 cows and you got 1? Well, that's not fair.
They must be capitalists.
So you run to the local politician and say, hey, this guy's got 3 cows, that's not fair. The politician gets the police, they go arrest the guy, and they take him away. But guess what? You don't get his cows.
No, the government does.
The government gets them, they get shipped off, who knows where. But you never see the benefit of it. I think our kitty timer is going off for the night.
She's in chew mode.
So, we hope you found this informative and
Entertaining.
somewhat entertaining.
And hey, you want to troll us? Go for it. Like we said, once a month, we will be taking any comments that are nasty, troll-like, etc. We'll be reading them, and we're going to respond. You're not going to like how we respond. Please stop chewing on me.
Like I said, hit that like button, subscribe, notification button, make sure you keep up to date with any releases that come out. We'll see you all next time. It's Mom and Pop.